With the remaining time, I'm going to quickly run through a few of the reasons I give in the first half of the book for why a creator God makes sense of life, the universe, and everything. I often term it like this. I talk about 3 reasons why I believe God is the best explanation. Why do I use that terminology? Well, sort of as John alluded to in the opening talk, we all have beliefs. We all have explanations for the things we find around us. And often people think that, well, Christians are the ones who are making the claims about God and the supernatural. They have to provide the evidence. And an atheist may think, I can just sit back and wait for them to make the case. But I think that's a misunderstanding. The atheist also has a set of beliefs. And very often that is something akin to what's often called naturalism. The idea that there is no God, there's no supernatural things. All that really exists in the world is matter and molecules in motion, obeying the blind forces of nature, essentially. So that's one way of understanding life in the universe. Now, another way of understanding it is Christianity. And in this view, humans are not an accidental byproduct of the universe, as they would have to be in the atheist worldview. We're meant to be here. There is a God behind the whole show. And as John said, that God became personally involved with us in the person of Jesus Christ. And the question is, which version of reality is true? Which offers the best explanation of life, the universe, and everything? And so that's why I start off with the first reason. I believe God is the best explanation of human existence. God makes sense of human existence. Now, on Facebook, you can add your religious status to your profile. And I've got an atheist friend, and when I read it made me chuckle because he said, I have trouble even believing that I exist, was what he put on his status. And it's funny because actually, he's got a point, actually. Human existence, you and I, are incredibly unlikely when you think about it. There's a familiar mantra and a bit of a popular myth that we don't need God now that we've got science to explain everything. But if anything, I'd say the direction of travel in the last 60 or 70 years has been in the opposite direction, that science increasingly is pointing towards evidence for God. Let's start with something you might be familiar with. You may well have heard it on the show, in other arenas, the fine-tuning of the universe. This was a revelation to me when I began looking into the evidence for Christianity and started to bring on some of the world's experts in this area. Many of you will be familiar with this, but for those who aren't, physicists agree that when the universe came into existence, the fundamental laws and physical constants it was birthed with and which govern it were fine-tuned to an astonishingly accurate degree to allow for life to develop in the course of the cosmos. Take, for example, the force of gravity. We know what gravity is. It's the force that sticks us to the ground. Now, it's sort of like the superglue of the universe, if you like. It holds together planets and solar systems and galaxies. In fact, the force is incredibly weak. One single atom exerts a very, very tiny amount of gravitational force. But it has a very, very specific value. And if it were just ever so slightly weaker, it would not be strong enough to hold together anything. And what you would end up with is a vastly sort of uniform matter spread out evenly through the universe and really nothing for life to begin on. There would be no galaxies, planets, chemistry to get life going. And if it was just a tiny fraction stronger, it would be too strong and everything would collapse back in on itself. But what are we talking then with the wiggle room, this particular force of gravity and how finely tuned it is? Well, science tells us that if it differed from its actual value by 1 part in 10 to the 60, then the universe as we know it would be unable to exist. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with scientific notation, 10 to the 60 is a 1 with 60 zeros after it. Or written out in words, it would be 1 trillion, 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 trillion. And what that tells us is that this had to take this particular value, it's incredibly specific value, in order for us to be able to be here. And when you add to that the fact that there are about 30 or so other extremely finely tuned, much more finely tuned values and initial constants, it raises this incredible question. Why Was it set up that way? What's going on? It seems to pose a massive question mark over why we're here. It looks like the universe saw us coming in some way. In fact, agnostic physicist Fred Hoyle is famous for remarking, a common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. Now, Fred Hoyle was an atheist, and as far as I know, he remained an atheist in his life, but he could see that this was a most remarkable feature of our universe. So what best explains this fine-tuning? And of course, we've done many shows debating this. There are lots of other possible answers out there. Maybe, life could have developed in some alternative setup, but maybe there's a multiverse, many chances for different values to emerge. We could go into those, but we don't have time. For me, having heard all the arguments for and against in my time on the show, I still believe the arrow of evidence firmly points in the direction of a designer. Because it's not just the fine-tuning. Think about the extraordinary complexity and nature of DNA and what it took to get that going for life to develop on the Earth. The very universe in which life arose, result of this thing we call the Big Bang 14 billion years ago, as John said, very much, a lot of people argue, points to a beginning, the coming into existence of space, matter, energy, time itself. And it's natural to ask, well, what set that off? When it comes to that, there only seems to be one candidate, as far as I can see, for the job. Because if something that's coming into existence is spatial and it has matter, energy, and time, the cause has to transcend that. It has to be immaterial, timeless, enormously powerful. And there's really no other candidate for that job except God. Now, of course, this stuff gets debated and is highly debated in the literature, on the blogs, on the show. If you're asking me, though, where does the direction of evidence point? When you look at the big picture, I'm still convinced that it points towards God, not away from God. Towards a universe which wasn't just coming from nowhere, going nowhere, and we're just the accidental byproduct. A universe in which we were intended as the outcome of something by something beyond the universe.